before getting into the technicalities of the different stages of the application form or the application process, it's important to remember that your job as the applicant is simple. Your job isn't to write an application form or to do an interview. Those are merely tools. Your job is to sell yourself. And by that I mean that you have to convince the firm that you have the potential or the value to make you worth investing in. And when you're applying for a role in a commercial law firm, which is bound to be competitive, being able to sell yourself is important so that you can stand out from the crowd. A lot of my videos up to now have been dealing with the specific questions in an application form and breaking down how best to answer them. And I'll keep doing those in the future for sure. But I believe that knowing your strengths and your weaknesses and knowing how they relate to a law firm's competencies is really important when trying to sell yourself. So let's talk about identifying your strengths. In any job, there'll be some competencies that you'll need to show. So for example, as a commercial lawyer, it could be attention to detail, time management, or communication, which might be the skills that you need. But we're not so worried about the competencies at this stage yet. Before that, you'll want to identify your strengths, and these are unique and personal to you. And by a strength, I mean an ability that you have that's enjoyable, that's relevant to the role, and that you are generally better at than others. And there are a few ways that you can identify your strengths. Firstly, you can do it simply by self-reflection. This could be as simple as just thinking about what you do in your day-to-day life and what emotions they evoke. For example, if you had a role as a general secretary in your society's committee, you might have been tasked with organising loads of events. And if you found this an enjoyable thing to do, and you notice that you're generally better than the rest of the group at doing this, then you found one of your strengths. You've enjoyed demonstrating your organisation skills, and it's not necessarily something that everyone else seems to enjoy too. Secondly, you can turn to others to help identify your strengths. Ask some people who you know and who you trust to tell you what they think are your strongest traits. This could be a friend, a family member, an academic tutor, or anyone who you think might actually know you quite well. And the good thing about this is that they might be able to tell you something that you weren't necessarily aware of in yourself. And the third way you can find your own strengths is to explore new things. This is a great way if you're still at uni because there's loads of opportunities there to get involved in different societies and take on different roles in committees and all this sort of stuff. And by getting involved in new things, you'll be able to try these new things in a new setting that might be kind of like a work-like setting, and you'll be able to understand the strengths that you might not have known that you have. And as I said, at uni, this is probably really, really simple to do because you can just get involved in loads of different societies. But even if you're not at university, there are still things that you can do, like start writing a blog or maybe start running a small business. By exploring new things, you can test yourself in a new work-like sort of environment and figure out if you have any strengths that you didn't know about before. And once you've gone through this process and you've identified your strengths, you should get a piece of paper and draw 2 columns. Label the first column strengths and label the second column demonstration. And then just fill it in with the strengths that you've identified and where you've demonstrated them. So you could say something like, time management is a strength of mine, and I've demonstrated it by balancing my academic work alongside my university society committee position. Next, you'll want to match your strengths with the role's competencies. You'll probably be able to find the exact competencies that a law firm's looking for on its website or on its graduate recruitment pages. But if you can't find one, here's a general list of what law firms are looking for in a candidate. Then you'll want to compare the list that you made, which is your strengths, against the competencies that you found that a law firm wants. This way you'll know exactly which areas of yourself you should emphasize throughout the application. A lot of people tend to get the competencies list first and then write it down and try and fill in how they demonstrate every single one of these competencies. And I get why that's appealing because you're making yourself, as near to perfect as you can be when you're making the application. But a law firm is aware that you're not going to be the 100% perfect candidate. In fact, no one is. I think that by going through your strengths first and identifying those and then matching it to the competencies, you can really figure out which areas of yourself you should emphasize throughout the application, the interviews, the entire assessment. So once you've matched up your strengths with the competencies of the law firm, you'll probably find that there are some competencies that you haven't matched up with your natural strengths. And these are probably your weaker points. So for now, let's just call these your weaknesses. And you might be tempted to think really hard or dig really deep to come up with an example of when you have actually demonstrated this competency, which you don't really think you have. But I don't think that's a good idea. Because if you're just making things up to look like the perfect candidate, eventually that's going to come across as insincere, especially if you're in an interview setting. And as I said earlier, law firms aren't expecting you to be the 100% perfect candidate. In fact, they probably wouldn't believe it if you said you were. Knowing your weaknesses is actually really useful in the application process, and I'll come on to why in a second. Think back to those competencies that you don't think align with your natural strengths. What you'll want to do with these is identify that these might be your weaknesses and then come up with the solution as to how you're improving them. That's it. That way, each of your weaknesses is paired with a solution. Or in other words, what you're doing to improve in that area. So for example, for me, one weakness that I'd say I have is public speaking. It's something I've never really enjoyed doing. I always got nervous doing it at school or anywhere else. But as a commercial lawyer, whether it's through giving presentations or seminars or whatever it might be, it's kind of inevitable that you're going to have to do some public speaking at some stage. What I would do is first identify that public speaking is a weakness of mine and then explain how I'm solving this. So for example, I could join a debating society or start doing mooting or something where I'm forced to develop that skill. And the reason that knowing your weaknesses is actually really useful is that it shows that you're honest and self-aware. But more importantly than both of these things, it shows that you're willing to learn. So once you've gone through this whole process, you'll want to go back to that competency list that lists all the characteristics that your employer wants to see. And next to each one of them, you should now have a demonstration of how you're demonstrating that skill, if it's one of your strengths, or a solution as to how you are improving in that skill, if it's one of your weaknesses. Once you've gone through it and made this completed list, you'll be in a really strong position to answer any questions about you, especially any ones that relate to competencies, throughout the application or the interview. So I know this video has been a bit different to the normal ones I will make when I talk about specific skills or how to answer specific application questions. And I'll keep making those videos as well in the future. But I think it's quite valuable to have this higher level understanding of your strengths from before you start writing your application. And the good thing about this process is that it's probably something you'll only have to do once per application cycle or like once a year, because it's quite unlikely that your strengths and weaknesses are going to be changing that regularly. Knowing your strengths really clearly is so important when it comes to answering competency questions or answering questions like, what do you think the skills are that a trainee needs to have? And these are pretty common questions in the application form. And it's quite likely that your interview is going to be in part about you. And in that setting, it's quite useful to know your strengths really well because it's something that then you can easily discuss with your interviewer. But I think being able to talk confidently about your weaknesses is really, really important. Firstly, I think it humanizes you and makes you seem like a normal person, which is always good. And secondly, it shows that you're an honest person as well. But even more important than this, if you're talking about your weaknesses and then specifically talking about how you're trying to improve them, which we've called the solutions, it shows that you're proactive and you're willing to learn. And these are the most important skills that you can have as a trainee. It shows that you believe that just because you're not naturally really gifted at something, it doesn't mean that you'll never be able to learn that thing. And that sort of mindset will give confidence to any interviewer. So that brings us to the end of this video. I know it's been a slightly different style and a bit more of a general thing, so let me know what you think by leaving a thumbs up or a thumbs down or a comment down below. I've also got an Instagram page where I post updates and get video ideas as well. So make sure you follow that and send me a DM if you have any ideas of topics you want me to cover. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll catch you next time.